This was the final boss of Act 1. 2 phases, more than 9,000 life, and one very stupid rule. 1 shot, 1 kill. Chat said the run was impossible. My friends, they said the run was impossible too. So, naturally, I started a fresh solo self-found character and spent the next week trying to prove everyone wrong. The main rule was simple. Every boss had to be defeated in 1 hit from a single skill. Any ignites or dots count as being part of that 1 shot, but I'm really looking for that crisp 100 to 0 type 1 shot that's absolutely undeniable. Any buffs and debuffs are allowed, but anything that deals damage to the boss has to reduce its life to 0. Otherwise, it's a reset to the nearest checkpoint. For bosses with phases, a 1 shot counts as dealing enough damage to clear that phase in a single hit. There's no bypassing this, so each phase is treated as its own 1 shot check. The next rule? Fresh start, solo self-found, no trade, and no twink gear. Vendors, gambling, crafting, overleveling, and resetting bosses are allowed, and in order to spare my sanity, normal monsters do not need to be 1 shot, because I wanted to make a challenge video, not spend the rest of my natural life in Clearfell. And one other major rule. In order to prevent Act 1 from becoming an enormous prison, I've divided it into blocks of areas. For example, the first block is from Clearfell to Red Vale. I can move freely inside this block, but I cannot enter the next block until every boss in that current block, including the optional bosses, has been 1 shot. And lastly, the challenge starts once I reach Clearfell encampment, because 1-shotting the Miller is physically impossible, I think? Please don't try, you might miss the launch of Path of Exile 3. So the first big question, which class and skill do I pick?
If we go with Warrior...
You might think of something like Perfect Strike. This is famous for getting those 1-shots, but it involves a lot of ignite and doesn't give that same insta-jib feeling that I'm looking for. Snipe is another good option, but there's one major problem. While it does have big explosion damage from a perfectly timed shot, the main damage only really comes from hitting a frozen target. And, well, there's no way for us to freeze something without damaging it first. Oil Barrage is another option, but again, it doesn't really feel like a true 1-shot, and it only becomes available much later. That leaves another option, Explosive Grenade. Explosive Grenade has excellent early single target damage, and the ranger begins near some projectile damage and critical nodes on the passive tree. That gave me 2 early ways to scale my damage, and I was going to need every single drop of power that I could find. So that was the plan. Crossbows, grenades, as much flat added damage as I could find, with absolutely no respect for my own time. And so, the run began. The riverbank was normal. Kill the Miller, reach Clearfell, grab Lightning Rod from Renly, and block out the fact that I was about to spend several hours bullying monsters well below my level. I was going to stick with Lightning Arrow while working through the first block, which contained Beira, the Devourer, Brambleghast, and the Rust King. But before fighting any of them, I needed to become offensively overpowered. The first major breakpoint I needed to reach was level 10. That's when the next crossbow base would appear in Renly's shop. But the problem was getting there. The Red Veil was only level 5, and I started incurring a heavy XP penalty past level 7, so the grind was on. Luckily, I had a ton to do here. The area contained runic remnants, which could drop crafting currencies. There was always a pack of rare monsters, I could get support gems, and there were the weapon caches to get the first weapon upgrade that I was going to need. This made this the best, most terrible place to live. Now, around level 7, Renly offered me probably the most absurd low-level quiver that I've ever seen. Triple flat damage and a bit of crit. I stopped my normal leveling to farm enough gold before I leveled up and the vendors would refresh. I eventually bought it, and then I remembered that my actual 1-shot setup used a crossbow. And so the grind continued. 3 hours into the Red Veil, several upgrades later, I finally reached level 10, and I crossed my fingers. If Renly didn't sell the sturdy crossbow I was looking for, I need to farm another entire level just to refresh his inventory. But by the grace of Kitava, he had one.
He does sell
But now I
them.
had to craft it. Each click was terrifying. But I had exactly what I needed. I added sockets, quality, flat damage runes, and then I linked explosive grenade with multi-shot and elemental armament. For the first time, this looked less like an impossible idea and more like an impossible idea with a very good crossbow. But before fighting anything, I needed to address one very important loophole. I could use Frostbomb to apply exposure to lower than enemies' resistance. The problem is, this deals damage. What's the solution? Brutality support. Linking Frostbomb to Brutality prevents it from dealing any elemental damage, but it still allows it to apply that exposure. The boss loses resistance, but the setup itself deals 0 damage. According to the rules that I made up by myself, this was completely allowed. But there was another tool in my arsenal: crit fishing. My crit chance was a measly 5%, but a boss could be reset indefinitely on a failed one-shot attempt. If a normal hit removed more than half of its life, this meant that a lucky crit could one-shot it. And this was a one-shot challenge, not a one-try challenge, so this was, again, completely within the rules that I made up myself.
Dude, I don't know. I'm so scared. This is so tense.
And so with my crossbow in hand, I approached the first hurdle. Beira was my first real test. 568 base life, additional energy shields, and much more effective health than a fresh character was supposed to remove with a single click. Chat already supplied a detailed list of why this would fail.
Sorry to disappoint, but even with Twink gear of multiple div, I have never one-shot Beira. You probably need to overlevel.
I stood up to the plate, pulled the trigger, and...
Oh wait, I mistimed it.
Oh, we did it! We got her! Beira. Yes!
she died. I was shocked. After hours of grinding and an entire chat explaining why this just simply could not work, the challenge was officially alive. My next 2 targets, the Devourer, went down without much of a fight. The big ignite at the end was enough to take him down before I headed to the Bramblegast, who I took down with a clean one-shot.
Okay, this should one-shot.
But the biggest targets still remained, the Rust King. He had the largest health pool of the first block, and despite my preparation, I was beginning to doubt myself a bit. I'd need a really big crit to take him down in one hit.
Okay.
And after just a couple of attempts...
Oh, come. Yep.
Oh, we got him! We got him! Block 1 was complete.
Rust King is down!
The runner had survived its first test and unlocked higher level zones, stronger modifier tiers on items, and the possibility of becoming even more unpleasant.
I was worried this guy was going to be brutal to kill.
The next block was everything from Grim Tangle to the Cemetery. The Rotten Druid was first on the list. His life was a major jump from the opening bosses, but the first non-crit removed roughly half of it. That meant that the damage was already there. I just needed the game to roll the other half. Within a couple of attempts, Fungus Boy was reduced to a pile of ash, and I was free to move on to the Cemetery. The Cemetery contains Draven, Assinia, and Lachlann. Fortunately, the next area contained one of the best farming spots of the run so far, the Tomb of the Consort. In this area, there was a rare chest, which was guarded by a rare monster that would always spawn when refreshing the zone. It also had runic remnants, and I could find item level 8 and above gloves and rings, which could roll a new tier of flat damage to attacks. So once again, correct strategy here was just to lock in and become a full-time agricultural worker.
Farming simulator.
And eventually the red chest provided with a nice pair of glove upgrades. Gambling produced another high damage ring, and every upgrade was a step closer to the ridiculous goal that I'd set for myself for no other reason than I was just bored of farming Abyss in Trade League. The grind continued, and after reaching level 12, I felt I was getting close, but the damage still wasn't quite there. But then, like a glimmer of hope, in a sea of endless darkness, Bristleboar. I'm sure you don't even know what this does. Most of Path of Exile 2's low-level uniques are just kind of bad and often really useless, but this one? This was the missing piece. Bristleboar has a modifier that grants rage whenever you are hit. And with 30 rage, I'd be looking at 30% more damage. This was it. It was time to try a senior. I locked and loaded, gave it a shot, and I was dealing more than half of a senior's life on most hits, meaning that if I could land a crit, it'd all be over. And finally, after a bunch of resets...
Okay, come on. Oh, yes!
No! Please!
Die!
Yes! We got her!
Okay.
Maybe not the most pretty kill, but the ignite came from the same single attack, so this was a legal one-shot. Raven, on the other hand, well,
Yes!
yeah, this was an unmistakable, crispy clean one-shot. And now, in our second block, only Lachlann remained. Even with good grenade placement, didn't seem like my damage was enough. I decided to grind out another level to reset the vendors, but they didn't provide. So I tried something deeply stupid. I lured a monster into the arena, used Killing Palm to generate a power charge, activated Rend for 50% of damage as extra lightning, swapped back to the grenades, and attempted to finish the entire setup before the buff expired. And on paper, this should have worked, but it was slower and less reliable than simply resetting and fishing for the crit. I'm not really patient enough for this, so I decided to do something even more tedious and go for the crit. I kept pushing, kept resetting, and finally...
All under him.
Yes!
6 hours into day one, the first 2 blocks were complete. The hunting grounds, Ogham farmlands, and Ogham village were open, where I'd need to face the biggest threat and most run-ending boss of them all, the Executioner. Setting foot into the hunting grounds, Crowbell introduced the first proper phase rule. Each phase had to be pushed to its forced transition with a single attack. Somehow forgot to collect the level 4 skill gem from the ritual in the area, which would have made this easier, but turns out grenades are kind of OP.
Is that enough for the next phase? Oh, it is. Okay.
And I cleared it first time pretty easily.
Yes! Okay!
Crowbell fell, farmlands contained no boss, and Ogham village was the next home of the grind. In Ogham village, I had a really good plan. It was to reach level 16 and buy the next varnished crossbow base from Renly. Ogham village was high enough level to provide some real experience, and on top of that, the runic remnants in the area could start dropping some real rewards. There was a lot of potential here for major upgrades. Everything was going super smoothly until I ran into one terrible run-ending problem.
Renly also will not sell? What?
Turns out, Axe 1 vendors and gambling are hard locked to item level 15. The crossbow I needed? Item level 16. Oh boy, without the varnished crossbow upgrade that I was so desperately relying on, the remaining options were pretty ugly. +1 projectile amulet, a useful unique, maybe some stronger flat damage rings, or maybe the extremely rare chance of getting a lesser jeweler's orb from a remnant. An extra support socket was the most realistic large upgrade, so I got back to grinding. After a few hours of grinding, I left for a drink, and the stream died. This wasn't a metaphor for the state of the challenge. It was an actual power outage. I flipped the power back on, reprimanded the person who decided to use the microwave while I was working, and within minutes of getting it back, the remnant finally offered exactly what I'd been farming for, a lesser jeweler's orb. This was the ticket. The new support socket let me use Ambush, doubling the base critical chance against a full life target. And so I went on to my next target, the King in the Mists. He was the gateway to both Spirit and Attrition. The first phase only needed to reach its transition threshold at about 1/3 HP, but the second phase needed a big hit. I knew I was close. I just needed the stars to align, and within a couple of tries.
Please don't teleport. Please don't teleport. Please don't teleport. Please don't teleport.
Yes! Ugh.
I finally had access to Spirit, and with that, I used it to cut the gem Attrition. Attrition grants more attack damage against a target the longer they remain in your presence. This was a huge upgrade with one major downside. Every serious boss attempt now began with me standing beside a boss for more than a minute, politely waiting for the damage to tick up. At least I got in some good dodge roll practice. But I was gonna need everything I could possibly get to take on my next target, the Executioner. The Executioner was supposed to end the run. Chat had no solution, even Crimson Cast doubted that this was possible. But with the first non-crit that I hit, he lost roughly half his life. That was the first genuinely encouraging bad results of the day. And again, with a bit of patience and a bit of luck, the alleged impossible final boss of the run died almost immediately. This was the biggest surprise so far. Despite all my successes up to this point, everyone had assumed that the Executioner would just end the run. And with this kill, major upgrades were on the horizon. Level 5 skill gems and the pathway to Geonor. The first level 5 gem that I got, I used to upgrade my explosive grenade. But with my second, this allowed me to cut Rapid Shot, which can be used to build heat, which can then be consumed by explosive grenade for 50% of damage as extra fire. It was another pre-buff, another button to remember, the exact kind of damage that Geonor would demand. With that, I set foot into Ogham Manor. Candlemass became the final optional boss in this area. After one miss and an awkward sequence with a staircase.
Oh, it's because of the stairs. Okay, come. Big hit. There we go. Oh, yes.
He went down cleanly. Only Geonor remained.
We're actually doing it.
The answer was warming up. A lot of warming up. I stacked attrition, built rage, generated heat, applied exposure, and learned that grenade placement against a moving wolf was significantly harder than placement against a stationary target. The encouraging news was that the first phase was already consistent. We just had to get him down to halfway. The bad news was that the final phase, Geonor had more than 9,000 life, and the successful looking hit was still a bit short. Fishing for consecutive crits would turn the run into a 1% lottery. But then chat pointed out something that the vendor plan had missed. Ogham Manor was an area level 15 area, but this meant that rare and magic bosses could drop higher item level bases. The Varnished Crossbow that I couldn't purchase from Renly, I couldn't buy it, but it was farmable.
You can get Varnished in Manor, are you serious?
The path to the end was finally clear. Farm the mana until I found that Varnished Crossbow, then somehow find a way to craft it well enough to make sure that the last several hours had not been a complete waste of human potential. It had been, but at least I could pretend that I'd done something useful with my life. And eventually, it dropped.
Wait, that's it, right there, Varnished Crossbow.
Varnished Crossbow was an enormous upgrade, but it was still not enough to guarantee that final phase of Geonor. I kept farming for extra levels. I could get some stronger runes from the runic remnants. I needed some better gloves and rings, maybe even a +1 projectile amulet, and if I got really lucky, I'd get a tier 2 uncut skill gem, which I could use to cut multi-shot for about 18% more damage. And with all of this, I decided to try just one more time. Could I get Geonor in a single, clean one-shot? By the final attempts, the setup had become a ritual. Frostbomb for exposure, let Geonor hit me a bunch for rage, build up Rapid Shot with heat, stay close long enough to build up attrition, place every grenade under him perfectly, and all of this, I then needed to pray for the crit.
Crisp, clean, one shot. Come on. Up against the wall. What? Those didn't even hit? Come on. Come this way, sir. No!
But it happened. 2 days, almost 12 hours of gameplay, several minutes spent researching, one power outage, and one extremely angry wolf later, Act 1 was complete. But the challenge itself wasn't. There was no victory lap yet. On the other side of Geonor's arena, the Visiri deserts were already waiting. Act 2 opened with Wrathbreaker, the hyena boss who had chosen the unfortunate career path of appearing immediately after Geonor. After everything it had taken to clear the mana, Wrathbreaker was less of a challenge, more of a damage demonstration. But the first real problem of Act 2 was waiting in Modern Mine. Ruja, the Dread Engineer. She had around 13,000 life and 75% fire resistance. And of course, most of my damage was fire. This was going to become a theme of the run. Even with a big crit and exposure from Frostbomb, it wasn't enough to get through Ruja's fire resistance. But I had an idea. Cold Attunement. This lowered my overall damage on paper, but it converted enough of the fire damage hit into cold to exploit Ruja's weakness. Instead of repeatedly throwing fire against the wall of fire resistance, I was going to turn some of that fire into ice. Would this be enough? I guess there was only one way to find out. After a few terrifying attempts and panic dodge rolling to build attrition while she flailed around the arena, the placement lined up and she went down.
Oh, that worked!
And onward to Traitor's Passage, where my next target was Balbala, a notoriously annoying boss for grenade builds because of her constant teleporting. But whether it was luck or skill, the first hit connected, crit, and she disappeared. Dropping a Jinn barrier that was part of a puzzle that could save this run later down the line. In the Halani Gates, I'd need to face Jamanra for the first time. Fortunately, despite a rather intimidating health pool, Jamanra only required me to clear roughly 3 courses of it, and that opened the way to Keth, the Mastodon Badlands, and Valley of the Titans, and introduced the first serious brick wall of Act 2 that left me wondering whether or not I'd bitten off more than I could chew. I headed to Keth first. If I could take down Kabbalah, I'd be rewarded with 2 passive skill points, but I wasn't even close. At least not yet. I was going to need some major upgrades. The next crossbow tier appeared at level 20, but the Dyad crossbow barely improved on the varnish base that I already had. The first meaningful upgrade jump was an alloy crossbow at level 26, so the plan was simple. Live in Keth until I was 5 levels older, and then pray that the vendor believed in the project. I logged off for the day, hopeful, yet unaware of the trials that lay before me.
One-shot challenge continues.
And the next day, refreshed, I returned to Keth and finished the grind to level 26.
There we go.
I went back to town, opened the vendor, and prepared to receive the alloy crossbow of my dreams.
That is tier 8 cold.
No dice. Gambling was no better, and desperation set in. I now had to farm another level, refresh the vendor again, and hope that the game eventually acknowledged how much of my life I had invested into this stupid idea. But eventually, the alloy crossbow appeared. During this time, I also farmed a gnawed jawbone in the Mastodon Badlands, which gave me 1 chance to desecrate a valuable damage modifier onto the item. It failed spectacularly. The crossbow was still an upgrade, and at this point, good enough to continue suffering, counted as a success. It was time to return to Kabbalah. Alloy in hand, dreams of a crit in mind, Kabbalah fell. The passive points were secured, and the Lost City and buried shrines opened up. These were higher level zones with a high density of magic and rare packs, which was exactly the kind of place where the run could catch up in gear. But unfortunately, at the end of this area was a possible run-ending challenge. Azarian. 24,000 life was manageable. 24,000 life with 75% fire resistance? That was a different problem entirely. Ruja had half as much life, and that had already forced me to rebuild the damage type with Cold Attunement. Azarian was either the end of the run, or just another wall I would have to erode one forehead-shaped dent at a time. Luckily, much like in real life, there were other things to do in the meantime to distract me from my real problem. I headed back to the Bone Pits, decided to take on Ekbab and Iktab together, the first dual boss of the run, giving me the opportunity to do something cool for once. One-shot Ekbab and Iktab together. It would have looked incredible, but it mostly looked like two large animals refusing to stand where I needed them to. After a dozen attempts, I managed to stack them on top of each other and one-shot one of them, but never both. I realized I was just stalling to avoid Azarian, and eventually separated them and killed them one at a time.
He didn't take any damage for I don't know what reason. Why didn't he take any damage? Alright, easy.
In the Titan Grotto, I had to face Zalmarath, a colossal titan, where I made one of the dumbest mistakes so far. Because of his huge hitbox, while building up heat with Rapid Shot, I accidentally nicked him with one of the bolts. But I decided to just test my damage and see how close I was, and of course, I one-shot him. So the damage was there, but that kill was not legal. I had jinxed myself, and of course, recreating that same moment now took forever. The nades kept falling off the arena, I kept missing crits, but I knew it could be done, so I kept rolling the dice until...
Nice! Okay.
And that left only Azarian in this block, who I needed to take down to open Deshar. Until now, I've been using ambush support, which doubled my crit chance against a target on full life. Ambush made the winning crit appear more often, but it didn't make the winning hit any larger. In fact, the loss of a support meant that when I did crit, the hit was smaller than if I was using something like Elemental Armament. I knew what I had to do. Remove ambush entirely, rely on my pitiful crit chance, and put in the damaging supports I needed. The attempts were about to get much, much worse.
How long is this dialogue? I think I need to go for a full timer.
Every reset meant listening to his full introduction while attrition built. I even landed a couple of crits, but his life bar refused to disappear. I was dejected, but just as I was about to leave and grind again, I gave it one last attempt.
Oh no, oh come on.
The numbers high rolled, the crit critted, and Azarian exploded.
Amazing! Oh, I didn't think we were gonna get him.
The relief lasted for moments before I realized that this wasn't even the hardest boss of the act, not by a long shot. Azarian opened the route through to Deshar, Path of Morning, and the Spires. The new zones finally let me catch up in levels, and a higher uncut level skill gem provided another desperately needed upgrade. But waiting at the end of it all was Tor Gul. Tor Gul was enormous. His life pool was just over 50,000, and of course, he also had 75% fire resistance. At this point, I reviewed my options. I tried adding an Omen Scepter for Malice and Critical Weakness for more consistent critical hits, but I only later realized that the weapon swap was quietly resetting all the attrition that I had spent a minute building up. My clever setup was making the fight even worse. But I had a new tool in my arsenal. Elemental Weakness, which further lowered the enemy's resistances. Combined with Frostbomb, I could almost completely negate the fire resistance of Tor Gul. And despite his intimidating life pool, the only thing left was a very large crit placed directly under a very large skeleton. This was by far the most satisfying one-shot of the run so far. And so, only Jamanra remained. Tor Gul seemed impossible. He had 51,000 life, which I barely cut through. Jamanra? 110,000 life and 2 phases. And because of a tiny piece of unnecessary immersive lore, the fight was about to become much, much harder than the numbers suggested. The upside was that the Dreadnought offered excellent experience and the possibility of tier 9 gems, but it didn't offer the upgrade that I had planned for, Bombard crossbows. These required item level 33, but the Dreadnought was only level 31. Nothing in the zone, except for Jamanra himself, could drop the base that I wanted to use against Jamanra. Great. I needed an impossibly huge crit, not just once, but twice. And even with ambush support, the combined odds were roughly 1 in 100. But there was one upgrade path that I had avoided until now. Ascension. So I took the Jin barrier that I had saved, entered the Trial of the Sekimas, and went looking for an ascendancy point. Now, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I usually like the Trial of the Sekimas, but I was dreading this. I had to get through 8 floors with the boss at the end, and if I failed to one-shot Rattle Cage, I'd have to do it all over again. But this was only a level 22 area, and at level 36, I had enough damage to get Rattle Cage down first time. I ascended to Deadeye, grabbed Point Blank, and returned to Jamanra with slightly better numbers and exactly the same underlying problem. And at this point, I realized a 1 in 100 chance for 2 crits wasn't realistic. So I respec'd for more critical chance, and then realized something terrible. Ambush support only worked against enemies on full life. Jamanra's second phase didn't begin at full life, so this was already useless for half the fight. Preemptive Strike on the passive tree had the same problem. At least those bonuses would work in phase 1 though, right? Wait. Oh no. Something was dealing tiny amounts of damage to Jamanra in the first phase. Did I have thorns somewhere on my gear? No, it was Asala. Because of these tiny hits from Asala, Jamanra wasn't on full life in phase 1 either. The Omen Scepter was still giving me some crit though, but it was during this fight that I realized that my attrition was being reset every time I weapon swapped to it. In just a matter of moments, every part of the plan managed to fall apart at once. I wasn't sure what to do, so I returned to grinding the Dreadnought. I found a Seeking Essence and used it to craft additional base crit onto another crossbow. I tried Inexorable Critical in place of Ambush for a 100% increased critical chance. That improved how often I crit, but like with Azarian, this occupied a support socket without increasing the damage to the hit. In order to actually kill Jamanra, I needed Elemental Armament. To crit consistently, I needed Inexorable Critical. I didn't have enough sockets to possess both Optimism and the Mathematics. The best honest estimate was still around a 1 in 100 chance for 2 clean crits. After hours of attempts, I stopped for the day, dejected and fearful that it might be the end of the line. I tried my best, but maybe this was it. After a night's sleep and dangerous return of hope, I came back to the Dreadnought. I farmed what upgrades I could find and started rolling the dice again. My first phase crit, but a second phase failed crit. Over and over and over. Chat eventually suggested a compromise. Once I had one-shot phase 1 successfully, I could stop requiring it on future attempts and focus only on phase 2. Seemed like a reasonable interpretation, but I hated it. The rule was 1 clean shot for each phase. If the final run didn't contain a one-shot in each phase, I would know and it would feel cheated. So I kept resetting, kept hoping, kept coping, and eventually the impossible sequence happened in the right order. 2 phases, 2 clean crits, Jamanra was dead. And Act 2 was over. And now she kill steals? The campaign was not getting easier, but Act 2 had revealed the shape of the run. Whenever the game built a wall, I would farm, misuse the support, learn something embarrassing about my own setup, and eventually roll a large enough number to remove my problem. It was on to Act 3. Act 3 finally allowed Bombard crossbows to drop. The base dealt more damage than the alloy crossbow and added another grenade, effectively a major more damage multiplier before I'd even rolled a single modifier. Naturally, the first promising one had a strong physical damage roll, but then it absorbed a sequence of terrible regals and exalts. I tried to rescue it with Chaos Orbs, and I killed it.
Just make it
completely.
Good. Oh.
I finally agree with Reddit about one thing. This isn't a crafting system. This is a gambling system. From then on, every bombard was picked up and subjected to the same transmutation and augmentation routine. Eventually, one appeared with a bad prefix and +2 projectile suffix. Would this be enough? It was worth a regal, I guess. And it landed, adding a high tier of flat lightning damage. The next slam added a junk suffix, but left an open prefix, and against all sensible crafting expectations, it had become an upgrade. Mighty Silverfist was the first boss to experience it. I died in one hit, but so did he. It was an absolutely perfect result. Continuing on through the jungle, I realized something. Bristlebore had served me brilliantly this run so far, but relying on a boss to hit me for rage was becoming increasingly likely to kill me. I replaced it with Ferocious Roar, which gave me control over the rage setup and one fewer reason to stand inside a boss attack. Through the infested barrens and into Chimeral Wetlands, where level 36 crossbows could potentially roll +3 projectile modifiers. This was my new home, and Xyclucian was the target. I decided to give it a try just to gauge my damage, and the first attempt showed me exactly what I was missing. But I had a plan. The passive tree contained an entire wheel built for this challenge. First approach and the path leading to it granted damage, crit chance, and crit bonus against enemies on full life. Preemptive Strike added even more crit bonus under the same condition. Against a single phase boss who started with full life, it was perfect. All that I needed to do was grind and level up. And at level 41, the wheel was complete. My natural crit chance was now around 25%, with Ambush effectively pushing the opening hit toward a coin flip. And the crit itself dealt roughly 5 times the normal damage.
Xyclucian!
Stood no chance. This gave me the option to attempt the Trial of Chaos, but it had the same problem as Trial of the Sekimas. If I didn't one-shot the boss after running several rooms, I'd have to restart from the beginning. And like Zul'Marath, I reached the final boss, only to nick it with a rapid shot before the grenades landed. The run was invalid. The entire trial had to be repeated, and I decided that my second ascendancy could wait until I was much more certain of the ending. Root Dredge had been skipped to reach the wetlands, so I backtracked, removed him, and formally opened Hikani's Machinarium. Blackjaw had a large life pool, and of course, capped fire resistance. By now, that sentence had become less of a warning and more of an assumption. But the levels, damage against full life targets, and the bombard setup, these were enough, and he fell cleanly and opened the way to Hikani's Sanctum, where a truly run-changing moment would occur. Inside Hikani's Sanctum was a corruption altar. It could improve an item, ruin it, or do absolutely nothing. It can also be used on a skill gem, with the dream outcome being an additional support socket. I prepared a backup explosive grenade, walked up to the altar, and gambled the entire run.
Imagine, man. Imagine we get an extra socket on this.
It hit. One extra socket opened up damage, crit, and utility options that had been mutually exclusive for the entire run. For the first time, I wasn't having to choose between crit chance or damage. I could have it all.
Now we're cooking.
And Zicoatl was the first demonstration. Heat buildup from Rapid Shot, Rage from Ferocious Roar, a full grenade volley, and expanded support setup removed him almost immediately. I was almost beginning to feel a little bit guilty. And then I remembered that the Matlin Waterways was next. And while moving through this area, chat raised a really interesting rules question. Payload support gave grenades a 50% chance to detonate a second time. Technically, both detonations came from the same skill activation, so technically it could count. We held the vote, and chat voted it legal. But I ruled it out anyway.
But it's not a one shot. Then it would be like a one button press, but it would be like 2 hits. It is one button press, but it's 2 hits. I'm looking for that. It's a one shot. Look, I made the rules, okay? All right, let's not think too deeply about this before I get myself in trouble.
A one-shot should feel like one moment in which a boss goes from 100 life to 0. Not a legal argument followed by a delayed second explosion. Payload would remain in the emergency cheese drawer, but I wanted those one-shots to be utterly undeniable. The debate helped me block out the rest of the area, and I approached Azak Bog, where I'd need to take on Ignag Duke. She moved erratically and filled the arena with erupting bone walls. Getting the correct nade placement was a pain, but after just a couple of attempts, I finally caught her in the volley.
Got her!
Permanent spirit reward opened up time of need because I didn't really know what else to take. I could have kept using Dire Strike, but I felt like I had enough damage without needing to incorporate more cheesy tactics into my already complex setup. I returned to Lachlann, pulled the lever, and opened the way to the Drowned City and Molten Vault. Within the Molten Vault was Mechtal, his arena a long hallway, battering me with lava waves, and a boss who kept retreating into them. And who would have thought? The boss of the Molten Vault had capped fire resistance, but he had one major weakness: cardio.
I want to teach you guys something.
You might not know it, but if you lure him far enough, he eventually becomes exhausted, creating the ideal moment to throw out every grenade directly into his face. Damage was still falling a bit short. Until chat suggested Embitter support. The heat bonus from Rapid Shot normally became extra fire damage. Embitter converted that to cold instead. Kinda like Cold Attunement, but even better. Mechtal resisted fire and hated cold. For once, the resistance problem had a satisfying answer.
Yes! Got him! Sir, I have brought back the Hammer of Kamasa.
The Queen of Filth was positioned as the next villain, and after smothering me in her flaps, I responded by blasting her with a barrage of grenades.
Time!
Ketsuli, who essentially lives inside a sun, guess what? He had massive fire resistance, but he also had cardio issues similar to Mechtal. Out of breath, on his knees, and vulnerable, he took a load to the face and collapsed, granting me the power of time travel and the ability to visit
All right.
Utsal.
Guess what? For some reason she has fire resistance, but not chaos resistance.
Viper Napuatzi, bane of new characters, filterer of PoE 1 veterans, became one of the most cathartic kills of the run. The single spray of tactical explosives ended the fight before it could become its usual disaster.
Viper Napuatzi.
And now, only Doryani remained.
Existence is a thing of beauty.
2 phases, a massive life pool, and one defensive layer that I had not accounted for: intelligence. Doryani could see the grenades and simply float away from them. After dozens of failed attempts, trying to reverse engineer his movement patterns, I decided to catch him the instant he became targetable.
I have a plan for phase 1.
But to avoid this exact cheesy tactic, bosses have a heavy damage reduction during their first opening moments. I needed to manipulate his movement, predict where he would stop, and place the volley before he arrived.
Oh! Okay, that's a clean one phase, right?
First phase became possible. The second, he had more than 200,000 life. Even when I crit, the lightning portion of the weapon still had a high roll. Every successful phase 1 led to either a non-crit or a low damage roll in phase 2. This wasn't looking good.
I don't think that was a crit.
First phase, crit.
Yes!
Second phase without a crit, reset. Crit with a low lightning roll, reset. Grenades placed beautifully into the exact space Doryani had just decided to not occupy, reset. Eventually, he moved correctly. Crit landed, and the damage high rolled. The second phase, I was patient, build up the attrition, pray for the crit, and
Oh! Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on! Yes! Got him! Oh, thankful. Dude, I was worried about that one.
and I was rewarded with 2 Divine Orbs, valuable currency that was almost completely useless to the run. Hell, I would have taken a couple of Regals over Divines at this point. And now, Act 3 was finally complete. But at the end of the next act was Tavakai, a boss with massive life, 3 phases, and 3 crit checks that meant I needed to stop relying on good luck and start manufacturing it.
Ahoy there, mate. Over here.
Act 4 opened in several directions. I started with the Isle of Kin because it offered easy runic remnants, experience, and a ton of options for upgrades. For the first time since Act 1, the area level was above my own, so the experience bar finally remembered how to move. The Blind Beast fell, and the Volcanic Warrens offered a guaranteed rare ring. But there was one problem: Krutog. This was a boss with a health pool large enough to humble me again. I needed to go back, gain some levels so that I could allocate dispatch foes to return with an even higher critical chance. And the second visit to Krutog ended with 1 explosion.
Yes, we got him.
And the rest of the early act began to look like a highlight reel. Captain Heartland in Journey's End destroyed. Fear itself, 1 shot. Scourge of the Skies died too quickly to summon its child to witness its fiery death. The prisoner's solitary confinement ended. The Great White One became Shark Boy Sashimi, and Boob Lady, she exploded before I could even scroll wheel to zoom in. The first half of the act was over at record pace. The next thing I took on the Pastor Tree was cluster bombs, which granted me an additional grenade. And with endless munitions, this meant that I no longer needed to rely on the Bombard crossbow's built-in additional projectile. And that opened up a new base, the Blackfire crossbow. This crossbow has 7% base crit instead of 5. That little difference was multiplied by every increased critical chance modifier on the tree, supports, and gear, and then further doubled by ambush against full life targets. It was exactly what I needed for Tavakai. I found a respectable one, but then later, seemingly for the first time this run, Danik sold me an absolutely absurd double flat damage crossbow.
Holy, what is this?
It didn't even need a crit suffix for this to become the weapon of the run.
This is crazy.
And on the final day, the audience was still finding future bosses to doubt. Yama the White was next. You're not ready had become less of a warning and more of a production cue.
I've been told I've been cooked since Act 1.
But I'd heard it so many times before and proved the doubters wrong every single time. Guess I just have to do it again.
Okay. Yama sees you.
Crimson Cause said no, I can't one-shot him. I did in fact one-shot him.
But now, Torvian stood between me and the final route.
Alright, Torvian HP 242.
Crimson Cast even demonstrated a possible skip that I could use in case I struggled a bit too much.
Instant Leech with Mom? Huh?
But this was unnecessary. Torvian died, and in keeping with the run's finest traditions, managed to kill me as well.
Alright, here we go.
Benedictus, despite filling the arena with elaborate wall spells, was converted into a red mist before the architecture could even matter. And so, Tavakai was open.
I'm blind.
Tavakai had 3 phases. Each required a crit, but unlike Jamanra, he returned to full life between them. That meant that ambush, preemptive strike, and every full life bonus I collected would function. With inexorable critical included, the chance to crit was roughly 75% per phase. 3 checks at 75% was finally a problem I could imagine solving without aging another year. And then the game decided that the run was over before even I did. In Nakanu, just before the entrance to Tavakai,
Vile Knight.
a unique helmet dropped. The Vile Knight. The Vile Knight granted increased hit damage against rare and unique enemies for every second they remained in my presence, scaling up to 200%. It was attrition's deeply irresponsible older sibling, and it rewarded the exact ritual that I was already performing before every boss.
That is good. That is very, very, very good.
Back on day 1, Every victory had been followed by the name of the next impossible boss. The Executioner, Geonor, Azarian, Jamanra, Doryani, Yama, Tavakai. Now, after all the farming, crafting, and increasingly deranged support gem interactions, I knew exactly what was about to happen. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, nice.
Tremble!
Come on. Oh, nice. Okay. Please, game. 70% crit chance. We got this.
My people!
I'm a bit scared of staying in this fight too long. Come on, let this be it.
Oh, we got him. Tavakai is down.
Act 4 complete.
But there were still 3 interludes full of bosses, and I hadn't spent this long becoming grotesquely overpowered just to stop at the technically sensible ending. It was time for a victory lap.
Okay, where do we go first?
The Scorched Farmlands offered Isolde of the White Shroud and Heldra of the Black Pyre. Both fell.
Okay, Heldra.
Ciora, Blade of the Mist, disappeared in the Stones of Searle.
Oh, come. Yes!
Oswin, the Dread Warden,
Alright, let's see. How do we do?
followed in Wolvenhold.
Yes, Oswin.
At Halton Estate, one boss at a time felt too easy. Lady Elswith and Thane Wulfric would have to stand together.
Yes.
1 shot, 2 kills, first try. Interlude 1 was complete. The self-imposed difficulty had now become finding enough bosses to fit under the same grenade volley.
Oh yeah, we're gonna go 1, 2, 3.
Ukti the Scorpion and Anundur the Worm followed the same treatment. Getting them into the same place was harder than killing them.
Okay, they're together. Call roar!
Yes.
But the double one-shot landed.
We got them. Double kill.
Elzara, the Cobra Lord, fell.
Yes.
Vornus the Fell Flame brought roughly 350,000 life and capped fire resistance. It no longer mattered.
Yes.
But Asmadi was the first boss in a while to restore some humility. He never stopped moving. Every attack hit like a truck, and he felt closer to a Dark Souls boss than a campaign victory lap. The good news was that I was just getting in some excellent dodge roll practice. This was the vision. This was meaningful combat.
Please die.
Yes.
It was still too easy. Interlude 3, the final countdown. Lithara and Crya Village donated some spirit.
Deleted.
The abominable Yeti became Monkey See, Monkey Dead. Rakar the Frozen Talent was turned into Chicken Tendies, and Stormgore lived up to his name for approximately 1 grenade volley.
Yes.
And now, all that remained was Zelina and Zolin in the Chuakik Vault. By now, the answer to the challenge was obvious, but I still wanted the ending to be undeniable. 1 final volley.
Let's see if we can get them both together. Finish this in style. And then reputation, and
It's done.
Every campaign and interlude boss defeated in one-shot rules on a fresh start solo self-found character. The answer was no longer theoretical. Yes, you can beat Path of Exile 2 with only one-shots. And then the quest log informed me that I'd forgotten to click a thing after Asmadi, so the run received an accidental epilogue. 1 bonus boss, one final legal kill, and this time, one carefully clicked Grand Barrier. It was done. When I first shared this idea with a couple of friends, their initial reaction was, that's not possible, or maybe on the best possible Twink gear, but no way in SSF. But I noticed something interesting. Immediately after rejecting the premise, they started grinding their gears, thinking of all the ways that it could be possible. And that's when I knew I had to give it a shot. This is the type of challenge that brings together all the best parts of Path of Exile 2. A good challenge, a lot of grinding, a ton of tinkering, a bit of research, and it all comes together to make the seemingly impossible a reality. I fully expected to have to abandon grenades at some point for some cheesy perfect strike or oil barrage solution. But it turns out grenades are just that good. This was one of the most fun things I've ever done in Path of Exile 2. Let me know which challenge you'd like to see next. But for now, the question is answered. Path of Exile 2. Can you beat it with one shots only? Turns out, yes you can.